Please accept this virgin bride." The rancher froze when she held his hand like she already knew him. The ranch had been quiet for many years. Out on the wide plains of Montana, the wind moved like it owned the land. It brushed across tall grass, shook wooden fences, and whispered against the old red barn that stood near the center of the property. The rancher had grown used to that sound. Wind, hooves, the creak of wood. Those were the only voices that stayed with him. His name was Daniel Harper. He was not an old man, but the lines on his face made him look older than his age. Hard work and loss had shaped him. 12 years ago, he had buried his wife on a small hill behind the ranch. After that day, he stopped attending town gatherings. He stopped laughing loudly. He stopped expecting anything new from life. The ranch became his whole world. Every morning before sunrise, Daniel stepped outside with a mug of black coffee. The air always felt cold at that hour, even in summer. He would stand quietly and look across the land. Miles of open fields, fences stretching toward the horizon, horses moving slowly near the barn. He liked the routine. It gave him peace. Nothing surprised him anymore. Until the evening the wagon arrived. It was late autumn. The sky burned orange and gold as the sun sank low behind distant mountains. Daniel had just finished repairing a broken gate near the northern fence when he heard something unusual: the slow, uneven roll of wooden wheels on gravel. Visitors were rare. He straightened and turned toward the dirt road that led to his ranch entrance. A small wagon was approaching, pulled by a tired-looking mule. Dust rose behind it. The driver was an elderly man with gray hair and thin shoulders. Sitting beside him was a young woman dressed in simple white clothing. Daniel felt a small frown form on his face. He wiped his hands on his worn jeans and waited. The wagon stopped near the gate. The old man climbed down first. His movements were stiff, like someone who had traveled far. He removed his hat respectfully. "Are you Daniel Harper?" he asked. Daniel nodded slowly. "That depends on who's asking." The old man gave a weak smile. "My name is Samuel Clark. I knew your father many years ago." Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. His father had passed away long before his wife. Not many people still spoke of him. "I haven't seen you before," Daniel said carefully. "It has been a long time," Samuel replied. "I would not have come if it were not important." Daniel's gaze shifted toward the young woman still seated in the wagon. She had not moved. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. Her head was slightly lowered, but her eyes were watching him. There was something about her expression, not fear exactly. More like uncertainty mixed with hope. Samuel cleared his throat. "This is my niece, Clara." Clara slowly stepped down from the wagon. She moved carefully, as if unsure whether she was welcome. Her dress was plain but clean. Her dark hair was tied loosely at the back. She looked young, perhaps in her early 20s. Daniel waited for an explanation. Samuel's voice grew softer. "Her family has fallen into great hardship. Her father passed last year. Debt followed. The land was taken. There is no home left for her." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. He had seen how quickly life could change. Samuel continued, "In our tradition, a woman alone cannot remain unprotected. I remembered your father once saying that your ranch was a place of honor. I hoped perhaps you might consider accepting her as your bride." The words hung in the air like heavy smoke. Daniel felt heat rise behind his eyes. A bride? He had not expected that. He had not prepared for that. "I don't buy people," Daniel said firmly. "And I don't take wives like livestock." Samuel quickly shook his head. "No, no, it is not like that. I only mean—" Before the old man could finish, Clara stepped forward. Her movement was sudden but not rushed. She walked directly toward Daniel. For a brief second, he thought she might speak first. Instead, she gently reached for his hand. Her fingers were cool from the evening air. Her grip was light but steady. Daniel froze. The world seemed to quiet around them. Even the wind felt softer. She lifted her eyes to meet his. There was no demand in her face, no anger, no shame, only something calm, almost familiar. "Please accept this bride," she said quietly. Her voice was soft but clear. Daniel did not know why, but something inside him shifted. He had expected fear. He had expected desperation, but this felt different. Her hand did not tremble, and the way she looked at him, it was as if she had seen him before, as if she recognized him. But that was impossible. He slowly pulled his hand back, not harshly, but carefully. "I don't understand this," he said. Clara lowered her gaze slightly, but did not step away. "I remember this ranch," she said in a near whisper. Daniel's heartbeat changed. "You've never been here," he replied. She hesitated. A long time ago, when I was very small. My mother worked near this land one winter. Daniel tried to search his memory. Winters had come and gone, workers had come and gone, faces faded over time. I was too young to remember clearly, Clara continued, but I remember warmth here. I remember someone giving me a blanket. Daniel's breath caught slightly, though he did not show it. Samuel looked surprised. She speaks of old stories, he said quickly. Childhood dreams, perhaps. But Clara shook her head gently. Not dreams. The air grew cooler as the sun dipped lower. Daniel looked from the old man to the young woman. He felt caught between irritation and curiosity. I won't decide anything tonight, he said at last. You both can stay in the guest room until morning, then we will talk. Relief flashed across Samuel's face. Clara simply nodded. Daniel led them toward the house. The wooden porch creaked under their steps. The house itself was simple but strong, built by his father decades ago. Inside, everything was clean but plain. A small kitchen. A wooden table, a fireplace near the far wall. Clara looked around quietly. Her eyes moved slowly like someone recognizing shapes from memory. Daniel noticed. He showed Samuel the spare room and offered Clara his late wife's old bedroom. He hesitated before opening that door. He had not allowed anyone inside for years, but something told him it was right. Clara stepped into the room softly. Her fingers brushed lightly against the wooden dresser. Thank you, she said. Daniel nodded once and stepped away. That night he could not sleep. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. The sound of wind returned, steady and endless, but now it felt different. He kept remembering the moment her hand touched his. It had not felt like a stranger's touch. It had felt known. He turned onto his side, frustrated with himself. He had built a life of quiet and control. He did not need new complications, yet deep inside something long silent had stirred. Down the hallway, Clara sat on the edge of the bed in the old bedroom. She did not cry. She did not panic. She simply held her hands together and stared at the window. She had chosen to come here. When her uncle spoke of possible arrangements in other towns, she had refused them all. This was the only place she had asked to be brought. Because when she was a child, during a bitter winter storm, her mother had once brought her to this ranch seeking work and shelter. She remembered being cold. She remembered fear. And she remembered a young boy, serious but kind, who had handed her a blanket and told her she was safe. She had never forgotten his eyes. Now, standing before him again, she had seen the same eyes. Years had changed his face. Grief had changed his posture. But the kindness was still there. And when she held his hand, she knew she had not imagined it. Back in his room, Daniel closed his eyes tightly. A faint image rose in his mind. Snow. A small girl sitting near the fireplace, dark hair, wide eyes. He sat up suddenly. Could it be? He shook his head. Too many years had passed. Memories play tricks, but still, he could not shake the feeling. Outside, the wind moved across the Montana plains as it always had. But inside the ranch house, something had shifted. The quiet life Daniel had carefully built was no longer steady. A wagon had arrived at dusk, and with it, a memory he did not know he still carried. Morning would bring questions, but for now, neither of them truly slept. The past had quietly stepped back onto the ranch. Morning came slowly over the wide plains of Montana. The sky turned pale blue as the sun rose behind the distant hills. A thin layer of frost covered the grass near the fences. The ranch looked the same as it had every other day, calm and steady. But inside the house, nothing felt the same. Daniel woke before sunrise, as he always did. For a moment, he forgot about the wagon, the old man, and the young woman sleeping down the hallway. Then the memory returned and his chest tightened slightly. He sat up and listened. The house was quiet but not empty. He could sense another presence under his roof. That feeling alone unsettled him. For 12 years, silence had been his companion. Now it felt crowded. He dressed quickly and stepped outside with his coffee. The air was sharp and cold. He walked toward the barn, telling himself that work would clear his thoughts. Routine first, questions later. Inside the barn, the horses shifted gently in their stalls. One of them, a tall brown mare named Willow, lifted her head as Daniel entered. He reached out and stroked her neck. "You're the only one who doesn't bring trouble," he muttered softly. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Trouble had not arrived last night. Something else had. Footsteps sounded behind him. Daniel turned, surprised. Clara stood near the barn entrance. She wore the same simple dress, but she had wrapped a thick shawl around her shoulders. Her dark hair was tied back neatly. The cold air turned her cheeks slightly pink. "I didn't mean to startle you," she said gently. "You should be inside," Daniel replied. "It's cold." "I'm used to the cold," she answered. Then her eyes moved toward the horses. "May I help?" Daniel hesitated. Most visitors avoided barn work. It was messy and demanding. "You know how to care for horses?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "My mother worked on farms when I was small. I learned by watching." Daniel studied her face, searching for exaggeration. He saw none. Without another word, he handed her a bucket of feed. "Start with the gray one," he said. "He gets restless if he's last." Clara moved carefully but confidently. She approached the gray horse and spoke softly before placing the feed inside the stall. The horse lowered its head calmly. Daniel watched. She did not rush. She did not act unsure. She moved like someone who had done this before. As she walked past Willow's stall, she paused and gently touched the mare's neck. "She likes to lean slightly when she's nervous," Clara said quietly. Daniel's eyes sharpened. "How do you know that?" Clara looked surprised by the question. "She did it just now." Daniel hadn't noticed. He turned away quickly, pretending to check a saddle. But his thoughts were moving fast. After finishing the feeding, Clara stepped back beside him. "Is there anything else?" Daniel cleared his throat. "You can head back to the house. Breakfast soon." She nodded and left without argument. Daniel remained in the barn longer than necessary. He replayed the morning in his mind, the way she handled the horses, the way she noticed small details. It felt natural, too natural. When he returned to the house, the smell of warm bread drifted through the kitchen. He froze in the doorway. Clara stood near the stove, carefully turning pieces of bread in a pan. Samuel sat at the wooden table, looking tired but relieved. Daniel rarely cooked more than simple meals. The kitchen had not smelled like this in years. "You didn't have to do that," Daniel said. Clara looked up calmly. "I wanted to." They ate quietly at first. Samuel spoke of travel roads and weather. Daniel listened but said little. Clara, however, studied the kitchen slowly. Her eyes moved across the wooden shelves, the window, the fireplace. "This place hasn't changed much," she said softly. Daniel looked at her sharply. "You said you were very young." "I was," she replied, "but some things stay in memory." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "Clara has always had a strong memory," he said quickly. Daniel finished his coffee and stood. "I need to ride into town later. We'll discuss everything tonight." Samuel nodded eagerly. "Of course." Clara simply lowered her eyes. Later that afternoon, Daniel saddled his horse and rode toward town. The ride gave him time to think. He remembered one winter nearly 15 years ago. A woman had arrived at the ranch seeking work during a harsh storm. She had a small child with her. The child had been quiet. Dark hair, wide eyes. Daniel had been younger then, still helping his father run the ranch. He remembered handing the child a blanket near the fireplace, but he had not thought about that memory in years. Could that child be Clara? The idea unsettled him. When he returned home hours later, the sun was lowering again. Samuel was sitting on the porch. Clara was hanging freshly washed cloth near the fence. The sight stopped Daniel. It looked right, like she belonged there. He dismounted slowly. Samuel stood and approached him. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I don't like the way this is being handled." Samuel looked worried. "There are debts, Daniel. People are not patient." "I paid for supplies in town today," Daniel replied calmly. "I asked questions." "Your family's land was taken, yes, but the debt is not impossible." Samuel's eyes widened slightly. "You spoke to people about this?" "I needed the truth." Clara had stopped hanging cloth. She was listening quietly. Daniel stepped closer to Samuel. "If this is about protection, we will find another way. Marriage is not something decided in one evening." Samuel's shoulders slumped. "You don't understand the pressure." Daniel's voice softened but stayed firm. "I understand pressure more than you think." Silence settled between them. Clara walked closer, her expression steady. "I asked to come here," she said gently. Daniel looked at her. "No one forced me to hold your hand last night," she continued. "I remember this ranch as safe. I remember kindness." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. Samuel looked confused. "Clara," she turned slightly toward her uncle. "You wanted security for me, I understand, but I came here because I trusted this place." Daniel felt something shift again inside his chest. That evening, Samuel retired early, claiming exhaustion. Clara remained on the porch as the sky darkened. Daniel stood near the railing, unsure what to say. "You don't owe me anything," Clara said softly. "I never said I did," Daniel replied, "but you feel responsible." He did not answer. She stepped closer, though not too close. When I was small, I was afraid of storms. I remember sitting near a fireplace here. Someone told me the wind could not harm me inside these walls. Daniel's throat tightened. You were that boy, she said quietly. The wind moved gently across the plains, carrying the scent of dry grass. Daniel looked out toward the horizon. I barely remember. I remember, Clara replied. Silence stretched between them. You've grown, Daniel said after a moment. So have you. He almost smiled at that. The ranch no longer felt like an empty place. It felt like something from the past had returned, not to disturb him, but to remind him. Inside, Samuel slept uneasily, unsure of what tomorrow would bring. Outside, under a sky full of stars, Daniel and Clara stood quietly beside each other. Neither spoke of marriage, neither spoke of debt. But something steady was forming, not built on pressure, but on memory. The next morning arrived with a quiet stillness that felt heavier than usual. A soft fog rested over the fields, and the rising sun painted the sky in gentle shades of gold. Daniel stood outside near the fence, watching the horizon as he always did, but his thoughts were far from peaceful. Since Clara's arrival, memories he had long buried had begun to surface. He told himself to focus on work, yet every small moment reminded him that his life had changed. Behind him, the door opened softly. Clara stepped onto the porch, holding 2 mugs of warm coffee. She walked toward him without hesitation and offered one. I thought you might like this, she said. Daniel accepted it with a quiet nod. Thank you. They stood side by side looking across the land. The wind moved gently through the tall grass. It felt calm, but beneath that calm was something waiting to be spoken. You wake early, Clara said after a moment. It's habit, he replied. Animals don't wait for anyone. She smiled slightly at that. Daniel noticed how comfortable she looked standing there. She didn't act like a guest anymore. She moved naturally, like someone who belonged on the ranch. Later that morning, Samuel approached Daniel with a serious expression. We need to talk, the older man said quietly. Daniel leaned against the fence, crossing his arms. Go ahead. Samuel hesitated before speaking. I received word from town yesterday. The debt collectors are becoming impatient. They expected Clara's situation to be resolved already. Daniel's jaw tightened. You mean they expected her to be married already? Samuel lowered his gaze. Yes. Daniel felt a wave of frustration. He understood the pressures of tradition and survival, but something about it felt wrong to him. She is not a solution to someone else's problem, Daniel said firmly. I know, Samuel replied softly, but the world is not always kind. Daniel looked toward the barn where Clara was brushing one of the horses. She moved slowly, speaking softly to the animal. The horse responded calmly to her touch. She deserves a choice, Daniel said. Samuel nodded slowly, though worry still showed on his face. That afternoon, Daniel decided to ride into town again. He wanted clearer answers about the debt situation. Clara offered to come along, but he asked her to stay behind and rest. I'll be back before sunset, he told her. As he rode away, Clara watched from the porch. A mix of hope and uncertainty filled her thoughts. She knew her presence had complicated Daniel's life. She did not want to become a burden. Inside the house, she cleaned quietly. She wiped dust from shelves, organized tools, and prepared a simple meal. The work helped calm her mind. While arranging items in a small cabinet, she found an old photograph. It showed a younger Daniel standing beside his parents near the barn. His face looked lighter then, less guarded. She studied the image carefully. Yes, she whispered to herself, that's him. She remembered being a child, cold and frightened during a long winter journey. Her mother had brought her to this ranch seeking temporary work. The young boy in the photograph had offered her warm soup and a blanket. He had not spoken much, but his kindness had stayed with her. Now she understood why she had felt drawn back to this place. Meanwhile, in town, Daniel met with a local clerk who handled land records and financial matters. The clerk explained the details of Clara's family debt. It's serious, the clerk said, adjusting his glasses, but not impossible to resolve. Daniel listened carefully, asking precise questions. He learned that the debt had grown because of poor harvest seasons and unfair agreements made by relatives. Clara herself had not caused the problem. That knowledge strengthened his resolve. When Daniel returned home that evening, he found Clara sitting on the porch steps, watching the sky. I was starting to worry, she said softly. I said I'd come back, he replied. She smiled faintly. They walked together toward the house. Samuel joined them soon after, eager to hear news. "The debt can be paid," Daniel explained calmly. "It will take effort, but it's not beyond reach." Relief washed over Clara's face, though she remained quiet. Samuel looked surprised. "You would help with this?" Daniel paused before answering. "I want things to be fair. No one should feel forced into a decision because of pressure." Clara looked at him with gratitude, but also with concern. "You don't have to carry this alone," she said. "I know," he replied gently. That evening they shared a meal together. The atmosphere felt warmer than before. Samuel told stories from his youth. Clara laughed softly at one of them, and the sound filled the house with a lightness Daniel had not felt in years. After dinner, Samuel went to rest early, leaving Daniel and Clara alone near the fireplace. The fire crackled quietly. "You remember more than I do," Daniel said suddenly. Clara looked up. "About the past?" "Yes," she nodded slowly. "I remember feelings more than details. I remember safety here." Daniel stared into the fire. "I didn't realize that one small act could stay with someone so long." "It mattered to me," she said simply. He turned toward her. "Why come back after so many years?" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because when everything else felt uncertain, this was the only place I remembered where someone was kind without expecting anything in return." Daniel felt a deep weight settle in his chest. He was not used to being seen that way. Silence filled the room again, but it felt comfortable rather than awkward. Over the next few days, Clara continued helping around the ranch. She learned quickly. She fixed small tools, organized supplies, and even helped Daniel repair a broken fence. Working together brought them closer without forcing anything. Daniel began noticing small changes in himself. He spoke more. He laughed once when Clara made a light joke about the stubborn mule. The ranch felt alive again. One afternoon, while repairing a fence line far from the house, Daniel paused and looked across the fields. He realized he was no longer thinking only about work. He was thinking about the future, something he had avoided for years. When he returned home that evening, he found Clara sitting under a tree, writing in a small notebook. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Just thoughts," she replied. "Good thoughts," she smiled. "Mostly." He sat beside her, feeling the cool grass beneath him. The sun began to set, painting the sky with warm colors. "Clara," he said quietly, "I don't want you to feel trapped here." She turned toward him. "I don't." "You should stay because you want to," he continued. "Not because you feel you have to." Her expression softened. "I understand, and I am choosing to stay." The words felt simple, yet powerful. The wind moved gently around them as the sky darkened. In that moment, Daniel understood that their connection was not built on obligation or tradition. It was built slowly, through trust and shared understanding. The days that followed felt different from anything Daniel had experienced in years. The ranch no longer moved in silence alone. There was laughter sometimes, quiet conversation, and the gentle sound of another person moving through the house with purpose. Morning sunlight entered through the kitchen window as Clara prepared breakfast. She had learned where everything was kept without needing to ask. Daniel noticed this each time he walked into the room. It was not just that she helped, it was the way she moved, calm and respectful, never trying to take over but always contributing. Samuel watched them quietly from the table, his tired eyes observing the change in the rancher. He had known Daniel's father long ago and remembered the younger version of Daniel, serious but warm. Now, that warmth seemed to be returning slowly. After breakfast, Daniel checked the tools near the barn. Clara followed, carrying a small basket filled with cloth and supplies. "I thought we could repair the saddle straps today," she said. "They looked worn yesterday." Daniel raised an eyebrow slightly. "You notice everything." She gave a small smile. "It helps when you pay attention." They worked side by side in the barn. Dust floated through beams of sunlight, and the quiet sound of tools created a peaceful rhythm. Daniel found himself talking more than usual, explaining how certain repairs were done and sharing stories about his father teaching him these same skills. Clara listened carefully. She asked questions that showed genuine interest, not just polite curiosity. "You loved this place even as a child," she said at one point. Daniel paused, thinking about it. "Yes, my father believed land teaches patience. He said you can't rush seasons or force growth." "That sounds wise," she replied. "It sounded boring when I was younger," he admitted with a faint smile. The moment felt easy, natural, but not everything was peaceful. Later that afternoon, a rider approached from the road leading to the ranch. The sound of hooves caught Daniel's attention immediately. He stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the sun. A man in a dark coat dismounted near the gate. His posture was stiff, his expression serious. "Daniel Harper," the man called. "That's me," Daniel replied. The stranger introduced himself as Mr. Collins, a representative connected to the debt situation involving Clara's family. His presence brought tension back into the air. Samuel came out of the house quickly, looking nervous. "We expected things to be settled already," Mr. Collins said calmly but firmly. "There have been discussions about a marriage arrangement that would secure repayment." Daniel felt anger rise but kept his voice steady. "There will be no decisions made under pressure here." The man studied him carefully. "I am only here to ensure obligations are met." Clara stood quietly near the porch, listening but not interrupting. Daniel stepped forward. "The debt can be handled without forcing anyone into anything. I have spoken to the clerk in town." Mr. Collins looked surprised. "You are willing to involve yourself financially?" "I'm willing to make sure things are fair," Daniel answered. After a long pause, the man nodded slowly. "Very well, I will report that discussions are ongoing." He mounted his horse again and left, leaving a heavy silence behind him. Samuel sighed deeply. "I feared this would happen." Daniel turned toward Clara. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands were clasped tightly together. "I don't want you to fight battles because of me," she said quietly. "I'm not fighting because I have to," he replied. "I'm doing what feels right." That evening felt heavier than usual. They ate dinner in thoughtful silence. The visit from Mr. Collins reminded everyone that the outside world still held expectations and pressures. After Samuel went to bed, Clara stepped outside onto the porch. The sky was filled with stars, bright and endless. Daniel joined her a few moments later. "You didn't have to confront him like that," she said gently. "I couldn't stay quiet," he replied. She looked at him carefully. "Why?" He hesitated before answering. "Because I don't want you to feel like your life is being decided by others." Clara's eyes softened. "No one has defended me like that before." Daniel felt unsure how to respond. He was not used to being praised for simple actions. They stood together in silence, watching the stars. "I was afraid when we first arrived," she admitted. "Not of you, but of what might happen if you refused." "And now?" he asked. "I feel calm," she said after a moment. The words stayed with him. The following days were filled with steady work. They repaired fences, cleaned storage rooms, and prepared for colder weather. Clara proved to be strong and determined. She never complained, even when tasks were difficult. Daniel began trusting her more. He let her help plan supplies for winter. He listened when she suggested small changes to make work easier. Slowly, the ranch felt less like a place he survived in and more like a place he lived in again. One afternoon, while organizing old boxes in the attic, Clara discovered a wooden chest filled with letters and photographs. She called Daniel upstairs. "These look important," she said carefully. Daniel opened the chest slowly. Inside were memories from his past, letters from his parents, photographs from his youth, and small items he had not touched in years. He felt a mix of sadness and warmth. Clara picked up one photograph gently. It showed a young boy standing near a fireplace, handing a blanket to a small child. Daniel stared at it, stunned. "I didn't know this existed," he said. Clara's voice was soft. "My mother must have taken this." The realization felt powerful. The moment connected their past and present in a way Daniel could not ignore. They sat together on the attic floor, looking through memories. Clara listened as Daniel shared stories about his family. He spoke more openly than he had in years. Later that night, after closing the attic, they returned to the porch. "I never thought someone from my past would return like this," Daniel admitted. Clara smiled gently. "Sometimes life circles back." He nodded slowly. The ranch felt different again, not because of pressure or obligation, but because something genuine was forming between them. As the wind moved softly across the plains, Daniel realized that he was no longer simply protecting Clara from circumstances. He was beginning to care deeply for her as a person. The days turned into weeks, and the ranch slowly took on a new rhythm. The quiet emptiness that had once filled the house and barn was replaced by the steady presence of Clara. Her movements were careful yet confident, and Daniel found himself noticing details he had long ignored. The way she organized the tools, swept the floors, or tended to the animals brought a sense of order that was comforting. Morning light spilled across the porch as Clara carried a basket of freshly washed cloths to hang on the line. Daniel leaned against the railing, watching her work. She moved with ease, her hands steady, her face calm. He felt a warmth in his chest he had not realized he was capable of feeling in years. "You've learned quickly," he said, his voice quiet. Clara looked up with a gentle smile. "It helps when someone shows you what matters most," she replied. Daniel nodded, though he did not respond with words. There was something in her tone that struck him, not pride, not arrogance, just quiet assurance. It reminded him of the child he had once helped during a bitter winter. The memory was faint, almost forgotten, but seeing Clara now, he realized it had never left him entirely. Later in the day, they worked together repairing a section of fencing near the northern pasture. The wind blew through the grass, carrying the scent of earth and wood. Daniel noticed how easily Clara handled the heavy tools, how she understood the rhythm of work without being taught in formal terms. "You have a good way with animals," he said as she guided a young colt back into its stall. "It's about patience," Clara answered simply. "And paying attention. Animals notice everything." Daniel studied her, realizing that patience and attention were qualities he had admired in his father and had not seen in himself for a long time. Watching her, he felt the stirrings of something he had not expected: trust. He could trust her. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, they returned to the house. Clara carried a few tools, her hands rough from work but steady. Daniel set the tools down in the barn and leaned against the doorframe, studying her as she moved about the kitchen preparing dinner. "You've made yourself at home quickly," he said, half as an observation and half as a question. Clara looked up briefly. "I feel safe here." "That matters more than anything else." He nodded slowly. Safety. That was the word he had been searching for without knowing it. It was not just her safety she sought, it was his too. The quiet life he had built, the routines he had clung to, all of it felt safer now because she was part of it. That evening, after dinner, Daniel and Clara sat together on the porch. The sky was filled with stars, and the cold air carried the scent of pine and earth. "I've been thinking," Clara said softly, "about the first time I held your hand." Daniel turned to her, unsure where the conversation would lead. "You didn't know me then," she continued, "and I was afraid, but I also felt something I didn't understand, something familiar. And now," she paused, looking at him steadily, "I know why." Daniel felt a strange stillness in the air, the weight of unspoken memories pressing lightly between them. "When I was a child," she said, "during that winter storm, you gave me a blanket and told me I was safe." "I remember that. I never forgot." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. The memory he had thought lost surfaced fully now, the little girl shivering by the fire, the warmth of a small hand in his own, the promise of safety. He had done it without thought, almost instinctively. And now, years later, she was here, grown and steady, standing beside him. "You've carried that memory with you all these years," he said softly, his voice low. "Yes," she replied, "and it brought me back here." Daniel exhaled slowly. For the first time in many years, he felt free of the weight he had carried. The years of loneliness, the fear of starting over, the constant routine, it all felt lighter now. Because it was not just about work or survival anymore. It was about connection, trust, and choice. In the days that followed, Daniel began to take actions that he had avoided for too long. He rode into town and settled the remainder of Clara's family debt himself, not as a purchase or a bargain, but as a gift of freedom. He did not inform Samuel or anyone else. This was a choice he made silently, quietly, because it was right. When Samuel returned, assuming arrangements would be finalized immediately, Daniel met him firmly. "She stays here because she chooses to," he said. "Not because of anyone else's decision." Samuel looked surprised, but he nodded. "It seems you have thought this through." Daniel did not respond. He knew the truth was simple. Clara's presence was not a debt to repay or an obligation to fulfill. It was a life choosing to continue alongside his own. Clara, observing from the porch, felt a quiet relief. For the first time, she realized she was truly seen as a person, not a solution, not an obligation, not a transaction. She had found a place where her choice mattered. Weeks passed and their bond grew naturally. They shared meals, chores, and long conversations. They laughed over small things, a mule stubbornly refusing to move, a spilled bucket of water, a clumsy horse trying to catch a falling leaf. The ranch no longer felt like a place of work alone. It felt alive, full of warmth, laughter, and a sense of purpose that Daniel had forgotten existed. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with orange and pink hues, Clara stepped closer to Daniel. She reached for his hand again. This time there was no hesitation, no fear, only certainty. Daniel felt the weight of the years and the memories lift from his shoulders. The touch of her hand was not only familiar, it was comforting, grounding, and full of trust. He took her hand gently in return. "I remember," he said quietly. "I never forgot," she replied. The wind moved softly across the plains, carrying the scents of earth and grass. The ranch, once silent and lonely, now hummed with life. Daniel realized that their connection was not built on pressure, tradition, or obligation. It had grown slowly, naturally, through trust, patience, and shared understanding. For the first time, he could imagine a future where he was not alone. A future where both of them could grow together, side by side. Clara, feeling the steady warmth of his hand in hers, understood that the past had guided them, but it was their choices that had brought them to this moment.